Well, thank you for joining us. We're going to be talking about an important subject today. Can we have the next slide, please? So, welcome. And we like to show Becky Base's photograph when we start these. Um, Becky was the inspiration for the creation of, and we named it this whole effort after her. And her focus was that if we just kept doing more of what we have been doing, things weren't going to get better, they were going to get worse. And so how can we, as a community, figure out how to make things better? Next, please. So we started these webinars on the security uh, situation surrounding the pandemic in March of last year. And we've made some progress. We tried to do two things. One, we tried to help immediately find ways to make things better. And then we also tried to learn from this experience to be better prepared for the next one. And in part of learning, we tried to get the U.S. federal government to spend some money to help that. And IARPA actually created a fund to fund some stuff that way. And we have a proposal into them for creating a complete data set surrounding the attacks taking advantage of the pandemic. We'll talk a little bit about the past in this webinar, but we're going to try to focus on the present and the future too. And can we have the next slide, please? What's really changed since last year? Last year we were worried about people who were sick not getting the treatment they wanted because the cyber attacks were getting in the way of the medical system actually helping people who were sick. Now the stakes are higher. What's being attacked is the vaccine distribution, logistics, support operation. And that's really critical because we're in a race. If we can get a substantial portion of the population of the planet vaccinated quickly, then we have a good chance of escaping this pandemic with minimal damage. If we don't, then the probability that we'll have a mutation that is really, really, really nasty and can't be treated with the vaccine, that probability gets higher if we can't reduce the number of people who are carrying the virus quickly. And the only way to do that is with the vaccines. So that's kind of the background. We're going to do this as a panel discussion. Our panel members were all present on the very first webinar we did in this series back in March of last year, and we're really lucky to have them all here today. And I'm going to start by asking Bo a question. We're going to do this as more of a panel discussion than as presentations, which we have in the past done. Bo, you've been involved with the CTI League, which has been really done a great job in helping to fight the current problems. And CTI League just issued a report a few days ago. Can you give us an update on that and tell us a little bit about what you're looking out and what you're seeing in the future?
Yeah, happy to. So, as you mentioned, the CTI League has done a lot of work in this area. CTI League is a new nonprofit organization. We operate a little bit like a CERT, Computer Emergency Response Team, but in an open source manner. So we're doing some threat intelligence gathering. We're doing some actioning of that then, and we're publishing information about it so that we can be better prepared. And what we saw over the last year, we started up in March 2020. We saw over the last, I guess, 9 months, almost a year now, is a dramatic shift in criminals starting to move towards healthcare providers and the COVID supply chain. So kind of, as you mentioned, the two things that are most critical in a pandemic right now, where we're looking at treating patients and making sure that we don't make more patients. We saw an uptick in ransomware as well as other types of activity, largely driven by criminal groups, criminal gangs. So with hospitals in particular, I'm personally very concerned about those. I spent about 3 years working at a hospital, and when hospitals get hit by something like ransomware, then they have to start turning patients away if their operations are not able to cope. So if their electronic medical record systems are down, or their lab, or their radiology department is down, they have to start turning away patients. And at a time right now where they're already near or at capacity, this can cause a cascading effect. So one hospital turning patients away sends all of those patients to other hospitals which are already near or at capacity, which causes a cascading effect. So even during normal times, ransomware is a really bad thing against hospitals. And during COVID, it can cause systemic failures to start tripping. And so that's, I believe, one of the most concerning things to healthcare in the vaccine response, or the COVID response. In addition to that, we saw adversaries going after supply chains for vaccines. So um, manufacturers of vaccines, some of the research and development. We saw going after some of the fill and finish and putting together the kits that were going to go out to the healthcare delivery organizations, as well as to some of the cold storage facilities, like Americold announced that they were hit with ransomware. So to me, this is all really, really concerning. It shows that adversaries know what weak points exist and what we care about, and they're willing to aim at that for profit. As worrying is that we're unable to defend against what oftentimes are relatively unsophisticated attacks, such as a dramatic rise in brute forcing remote desktop protocols. As everybody starts going to work from home, there's a lot more remote connectivity infrastructure that gets spun up, and there's a lot more people hitting that, or old vulnerabilities, well-known, highly exploited vulnerabilities that are getting hit. So in 2020, we saw a trend of that. We believe that will continue, that adversaries will profit from their criminal enterprise and continue doing it, expand their operations, continue going after these softer targets where there's a lot of money to be made. But I don't want to just look backwards. I feel like we should look forwards. It's a time to look forward. The new year has started, and it's in many East Asian countries, it's this week is the new year. Last week, a couple of weeks ago, was the new year. So looking forward, and hopefully with some optimism. And I do have some optimism. As Mark said, if we keep doing the same thing over and over again, that we know will fail, then we won't get any better. And I think that one of the things that gives me a lot of hope is looking beyond just cybersecurity. COVID has caused us as a society to do some things which are unnatural to us, or at least are out of the normal trajectory that we would have been in. So accelerating the work from home movement, which means that people are able to have a little bit more geographic flexibility, which means cost of living can go down, and you can hire people from, who are highly qualified and who live in a different place than the Bay Area or Austin or Boston or Seattle. It means that we're trying out new experiments like telehealth, which before the COVID pandemic hit, were unreimbursed. So if you had a telehealth program, you couldn't get reimbursed from insurance or for Medicare or Medicaid. That changed with COVID. And it's something that allows doctors to come into our homes to treat patients without having to visit a doctor's office where they may get sick at the doctor's office. It means that we can have a higher throughput potentially of patients. So there's a lot of good that can come from expanded telehealth. We're also trying new things with vaccines. So some of the vaccine candidates that have proven incredibly successful were ones that would not have gone into production otherwise. They were new approaches, new techniques that in theory were going to be great, but we needed a crisis to spark the experimentation and the willingness for the FDA and for other regulatory medicines organizations, as well as the manufacturers, to put these into practice. And there's a lot of other things that have me really hopeful. To loop it back into cybersecurity, a lot of the things I just talked about have definite cybersecurity implications. So more work from home means more potential attack surface. The eroding perimeter is now effectively gone. More telehealth does the same thing. There's more critical things happening over an internet connection. I think we've got some non-technical things we can do there, which is great. Like, being able to see patients and doctors and, not have to worry about machines getting tampered with in the middle. Unless you're talking about middling with deep fakes technology or something, which would be just extraordinary. And trying these new technologies, we need to protect the research and development and manufacturing that goes into that. Because if you tamper with some of the results, you could get skewed results. It could cause us to delay capabilities, delay rolling out capabilities, or obviously intellectual property theft, or some of the other traditional concerns that we have. But overall, I'm bullish on 2021.
Great. So I don't know whether everybody is attending this is aware of what the CTI League has actually done, but they've been, I don't even remember how many people. Last I looked, it was 1,500 people. How many
Yep.
people is it now?
It's about 1,500 cybersecurity professionals, cyber threat information and intelligence professionals, security researchers, and other just concerned people with a passion for this, including some non-technical folks too.
And and you, as a group, have been effective in shutting down. Um, should we call them pirate websites?
Yeah, we've done a lot of takedowns or assisted in doing lawful takedowns of scam sites, of phishing infrastructure, of crimeware groups, and we've got a lot of partners in law enforcement and the intelligence community around the world who are able to do these things in a way where we can elevate and escalate things to them that require them to go in and do it with the authority of a state government, or we're able to clear some of the ground clutter so that they can spend their time more effectively on the things that are truly more serious crimes or nation state type activity.
And that group has now been recognized by many national governments and by international organizations. It's
Yeah.
really remarkable what you've been able to do in a short period of time.
Yeah, thanks. We hit Wired's top 25 people and organizations making a difference in 2020, which was astounding. It's other people on that list are like the CEOs of Google and Apple, Al Gore, Fauci, and it's humbling to think that we would do something that would merit that type of attention. But it's also really empowering, and it shows that a bunch of more or less average people can have a role to play in anything. You just have to get at it.
Well, that's great. The the other thing that we've seen is, of course, is more experiments with distance learning, which are if we look at the at effective economic effectiveness of different parts of our uh, economy, education is the one area where we haven't seen dramatic increases in productivity with all the information tools. But now maybe we'll see something coming from there. But but Tom, there's another side to that coin too, which is um, what we might call diseducation.
Yeah, there's a lot of that going around. As you all know, we're in an attention-based economy. And so interested parties who want to disrupt any topic, really, they have to prey on our attention. And uh, my team for the past several years has been assisting in election monitoring effects. And the efforts here are to ensure that all the constituents have the right information where they should vote, that the voting and the polling locations are in fact open and secure and things like that. One of our clients, very forward thinking, approached us towards the end of last year in preparation for the vaccine distribution. This is a major municipality. They have, at the time they were launching or had launched a vaccine command center. And as part of that, they wanted to include misinformation as part of the scope, what they should look out for. Of course, Mark, to your point, we want to have a population that is vaccinated so things don't get worse and we can come out of this pandemic more or less successful and quickly. But there are a lot of folks who are interested in disrupting that, whether it's the motivations are numerous, I'll just say. In a few months' time, my team has been doing tremendous work. The scope is actually incredible. We're tasked with finding really any form of disinformation across the globe with a specific focus on this city. 17 languages are being supported, and we've found that there's some very interesting insights from this. We've seen a shift from typical misinformation where you talk about social media posts and news articles just being in text. And what's actually gained a lot of traction are videos and clips. Just imagine some of the things we're seeing are folks who are having a seizure or having a tremor. It's a very powerful image. It's very disturbing, and it incites an emotional response for viewers. Previously, in an election scenario, we might just hear something that, a polling station the line was too long or something like this. But no, these videos are kind of an evolution and being more widely adopted. Something else, we're really, excuse me. So we're really always trying to find the ultimate center of gravity here. Is there one particular party who's involved, a particular threat actor or group? And at the moment, it seems like this is very well distributed. Smaller parties have their own agendas, but there's no single driving force. Now, this is very early still, and that this is not a conclusion, I guess. So that might shift, and we might find someone who is more organized. But at the moment, it's just these smaller pockets.
So Tom, so the videos, is the point of the video that maybe 1 in 5 million people might have anaphylactic shock or something, and the video is, this is what's going to happen to you. It's guaranteed to happen to you. And
precisely, yeah. And the reason that we can confidently label this as misinformation is because these videos are repurposed. They're older videos from 2018, I believe, maybe even earlier. And so we can document that timeline and see that what is now being misrepresented as a reaction to a COVID vaccine is in fact not.
And then we hear stories about people in social media saying, don't get vaccinated because COVID is a hoax, and really what they're going to do is inject a chip into you, and this chip is going to do all these horrible things to you. Have you seen that?
Of course, yeah. That's a major hypothesis. I don't want to promote some of these ideas, but it's all related to 5G and mind control. As time goes on, the ideas get even more and more absurd.
But they get traction, and they cause behavior changes.
They do, and again, it's kind of a perfect storm that we're in, actually. So many people are underemployed or have lost employment as a result of the pandemic. So many people are stuck at home. We have a lot of time on our hands with enhanced restrictions. Like for me in Canada, there's not much more people can do than cruise around on the internet. And unfortunately, it's it's not very difficult to get lured into some of these. There's also some of the key influencers are notable individuals, and so someone who might not have previously had these opinions inherits them or adopts them because of other individuals who they might be, for example, say following on Twitter, and then it's a slippery slope very quickly. We know how the social media platforms show us exactly what they think we need to see or want to see.
That's an important point. So, what techniques have you been able to develop that can counteract this? I mean, finding it is good, but then what do you do about it?
That's right. So we pursue takedowns similarly to the CTI League that Bo mentioned, where possible. We have to look for terms of service violations. There are tools that you can use. So I have no affiliation with this company or tool, but something that I really appreciate is a little browser add-on called Bot Sentinel that will actually kind of score social media profiles and let you know about bot-like or suspicious behavior. The CTI League is a great example, but one of my researchers also said that there are a number of countries who have volunteer groups who are doing the same sort of thing as CTI League, and so they've come together to report it. And this is happening. This is happening in Europe, I think, more commonly than in the States and North America. But tremendous efforts being done.
Do you have the URL for the Bot Sentinel handy?
Yeah, I can post it in chat.
Okay, that'd be good.
Hey, there's somebody did it for us there.
Oh, good.
Thank you, Dave.
And then, is there? I mean, one of the things that's so effective about the CTI League is that it is an international organization, and it's coordinated activity between individuals in different countries around the world. Is there any coordination going on in this disinformation space? I mean, in attacking disinformation.
That's a good question that I would want to follow up with you after talking to one of my analysts and my team. Typically, when we're working on these things, well, actually, I can tell you that a few of our employees are part of the CTI League, so that's nice. But and we contribute, of course. But as far as broader disinformation sharing goes, typically we are working with these large cities or states, and our information flows directly to them.
It sounds to me like there is an opportunity here for some kind of coordination at a global level against the pandemic disinformation.
There is. I have one reservation, though. We're straddling a fine line because we do want an open society, and this, so we have to be. We can't be so heavy-handed on just information in general. So that's very tricky. Very tricky.
Yes, tricky. We got a question on what the name of the organization is. Can you tell us what CTI stands for?
Yeah, Cyber Threat Intelligence.
Thank you. Fleming, you're actually working with some of the real attacks. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience and how things look to you?
Definitely. Last year I was on these series of webinars talking about the COVID-19 related attacks. I showed some examples, and those things continue to happen. let me share my screen real quick so you guys can see one example. This is, let me know if you can see this, but I think you should be able to. This is a disinformation, I wouldn't call it disinformation, but it's impersonations, basically impersonating communication officer of the WHO, right? And basically in this case, coronavirus safety guide in a workplace. If you think about that, and this is this year, right? And people are making their way back into the office, and something like this is just to trick people to click on this document and potentially land a Trojan on the in the system. Could be doing bad things afterwards. Let it be, trying to identify all the caches for your passwords from your browsers, and do dictionary attacks. All sorts of bad things can happen. So this continue to happen in the field. And this is something I just casually pulled up from my, threat intelligence pool of data that I have, stopped so far. But remember, this is not the only one, right? Let me just share with you another one that basically I think it's related to return to work, and the economy comes back, and they're targeting a municipality. And if you think about municipalities or health organizations, they're not they may be suffering from lack of just expertise, or maybe just resources to fight these things. And this one's obviously tailored to tell, hey, there's $250,000 grant for training funds. Use it, right? Click here and figure out how to get this going. But in fact, it is obviously a malicious document with micros inside that could, start running PowerShell in your system or whatever it's capable of doing. But these are just coming from the email attack surface that we're seeing. But if you look at in general, just the application security perspective, there's a lot of things to talk about, right? So, for example, I think last year we had PS5 released. I know PS5 is, people use PS5 for gaming, right? And guess what happened? Like as soon as it gets released, all the units are gone, and then they show up in eBay, and for 3 times more cost. You know why? Because they have bots that basically able to scalp and actually make profit. And that kind of let me, of course, our solution, that we want to protect our customers, basically protecting the site from getting bot attacked, right? This bots are coming in from all different environments. I can talk about that later on. But really important thing to do is to isolate real human traffic versus bot traffic, because if that scalping situation happens to a very scarce resource, as we're talking about it's the vaccines that could be under attack. People could fill up all the schedules, making it much harder for people to get their appointment. Of course, there's good and bad too. I think there's if you can have a bot to help you find an open slot, that'll be good. But more than likely, the bad guys will take advantage of registration sites that are not very well protected, right? So if you think along those lines, it makes me worry when we are talking about millions of doses are getting distributed. But does that mean we're getting the vaccine to the arms, or are we, you start to hear these news about like no-shows. People register, schedule, but they don't show up, right? And why? And those are the things I'm concerned about. So just in general, along the whole supply chain, physical supply chain for getting the vaccine to the right place, keeping it cold, getting it into the arms, every angle, every spot, there's always an opportunity for the bad guys to get in. So that worries me quite a bit. But I always look to the future, like Bo and Tom just mentioned. There's a lot of good activity for us to actually unite and really work together on, defending the cyberspace and not letting it affect our physical space, right? So I think it's a 2021. We need to do more of that, and I'm excited to continue to work with our team to contribute to that effort. Yeah.
And then, and we should say that Fleming has also been a strong supporter of the activities inside BCI and providing service to the community as well as to his customers. And we appreciate that, Fleming.
No problem.
Um, so, one of the other things that people have been talking about is actual theft of vaccine or counterfeiting vaccine, and and disrupting the information chain that accompanies valid vaccine can also be a problem. Have any of the three of you run into any examples of this?
Well, I will speak to an event that happened about a month and a half ago, which is the cold chain attack, where basically someone impersonating a Chinese vaccine manufacturer to getting into people's system and eventually cause a major problem. I think while I don't have data to show like, hey, this particular vaccine is fake versus this is real, but I seeing how low people went last year, I'm not going to be surprised if they're going to take advantage and figure out ways to counterfeit or just cause a bunch of chaos, slowing us down, right? I think if you look at it, everything costs a lot of, I would just say not just time, but also a lot of financial headache for people. I think ransomware amounts is one of the biggest problems. I've been monitoring ransomware for many years, but the amount has gone crazy, right? And right now you have ransomware basically asking for a percentage of the victim's revenue, right? So a recent attack in Asia targeting a dairy chain, basically a retail chain, and this particular ransomware called REvil is known to charge a percentage of your revenue, like 9%. And just think about, they're gaining strength because they're getting the dollars and whatever form factor they get, right? That'd be Bitcoins or whatever it is. They're gaining strength. And the way I believe they're doing it, because Barracuda had done quite a bit of research on botnets, like how they're infiltrated. One example is the interplanetary storm, which we talked about in a webinar couple sessions ago. They infiltrate into people's homes, utilizing, in this case, ARM-based or Android OS are open to attack, right? This particular one can get into your Android device through your debugging bridge of your Android software, right? So if people leave that, just imagine that. So these botnets are not just sitting in the infrastructure for the bad guys, but they're sitting at homes, right? So working from home is opening the door for more potential compute resource for these bad guys. They can build that up. And I think CTI was involved, or someone, Microsoft was for sure involved in taking down TrickBots. And TrickBot command control, it was like, we're taking them down, but guess what? Like 2 weeks later, they come back out because they're so quick in moving. And so those are the things I believe as an industry and everyone, if we're able to do more together, we can potentially shut it down. But it's hard. Like also because the reason the ransomware ransom amount goes up is because they need more money. There's more of an economy going on for them. So it's unfortunately it's a balancing act. We have to make sure we disrupt them and make sure they starve if we can. Yeah.
Tom, did you want to talk about the size of the ransoms in ransomware?
I do, yeah. We actually work on the last stage of a ransomware engagement, which is the ransomware negotiation. And like it or not, it can be done. Sometimes when you have no other recourse but to negotiate, it can be done. An example of that, one of our clients who was attacked with ransomware, threat actors actually infiltrated their systems, went directly to the backup systems, encrypted this, piggybacked on those credentials to lock up everything else in the network. So there was no restoring. That was one of the more dire cases. In terms of ransomware amounts, you probably all saw the headline, Kia is a $20 million ransom. We are actively working in engagement where the number started at 7 million, which is, yeah, like Fleming said, not a unsubstantial percentage of this company's size. So it's difficult. It's very trying. But just one thing I want to highlight is that it's separate from a typical incident response engagement. And so it needs to be approached a little bit differently.
So it's expensive.
Yeah.
Does anybody want to take a minute to talk about what to do to protect yourself from ransomware?
Yeah, I think there's quite a lot of good guidance out there on the internet. I know CISA has published some. I'm sure everybody's got some out there. Some of the things that I've seen that are most effective are, first of all, a lot of ransomware comes in through passwords, as a lot of other cyber attacks, whether that's, default passwords or whether it's easily guessable passwords or whether it's, reused passwords. So strong password management, multi-factor authentication are two. Also, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of ransomware is now riding in on remote connectivity infrastructure. So perimeter facing systems like Pulse VPN, like remote desktop that are out there. If you don't already have a VPN in front of that stuff, put a VPN in front of it. If you do have a VPN, make sure it's patched and updated. And regardless of whether you do or not, actually, patch it regardless of whether you have a VPN in front of it too. But also passwords help for that as well. So those are probably the things that can most quickly prevent the most active drive-by ransomware campaigns. But we're also seeing a lot of initial access brokers selling access into organizations. So someone gains a foothold in your environment through some mechanism. It could be one of those that I mentioned, or it could be a different one, and then they'll sell it to someone else who then conducts the ransom. So just because you've done those two things doesn't mean you shouldn't also have backups, and look for backups that have an offline as well as an online component, or that allow you to restore even if something happens to the account, gets tampered with, and make sure that you're regularly practicing backing up your infrastructure and restoring your infrastructure. Because oftentimes people who have backups don't know how to restore it, or they don't have a complete restoration plan. And so that delays them and gets in the way.
A few tactical comments. Multi-factor authentication helps, especially in the case of unauthorized access. And there are a number of threat intel exchanges that are completely free, where you can get a lot of the IOCs to protect yourself. So the community has come together and has published these broadly. So as a follow-up, I can maybe suggest a few to folks.
IOC stands for what, Tom?
It's an indicator of compromise. So it's a known bad, for example, domain or IP address, something like that. And again, these are going to help with the less targeted, less sophisticated, but nonetheless very impactful. One of our clients simply had a spammy email that they clicked on, and that could have easily been stopped with email protection and blocking of these IOCs.
Yeah. The other thing is data exfiltration, and basically when they do ransom, they take your data. They can hold you like extortion attack, right? They will just say, "Hey, we'll sell your data if you don't pay," and that behavior can compound, can be recurrent. So find a way to make sure you protect your data. Even they have it, they have no way to use it. I think it's important to think about that way too. Yeah.
Good. So, I started out by saying back in March that we had to learn from the experience that we were having at the beginning of the pandemic and the attacks taking advantage of it. And yet, I was surprised by the attacks taking advantage of the vaccine logistics and related supply chains. So even though I'm trying to look forward, I missed it. If we think that we're actually going to be successful and we're actually going to get a substantial portion of the population vaccinated in time to prevent really nasty mutations, then we're going to see a kind of it can't say return to normal because we're not going back to where we were, but we're going to see a new kind of flowering of activity and lots of new things and lots of redoing old things. Should we anticipate attacks in that environment? And if so, what kind of attacks should we be concerned about? What kind of vulnerabilities should we be thinking about now in preparation for the good times?
Yeah, I think the decade of the 20s is going to, looking back, we'll look at it as the decade of supply chain compromises. Throw a rock and you can hit an organization that's been hit by a supply chain compromise within the last 6 months, probably. I think that in order to assure that we have reliable technology environments to drive our businesses, to underpin rather than undermine our way of life, our public safety, our hospitals, our vaccine distribution systems, we're going to have to really get serious about supply chain security, and do so in a way that doesn't stop at procurement questionnaires, right? The typical cure to anything supply chain is, well, let's throw another questionnaire at it. It's like, that doesn't really solve anything. There are some
compliance.
right. Or, judging an organization's capability by whether or not they've been through a SOC 2 audit process where they define their own controls and then say how well they do against them. I think all of those things may be good. They may be necessary. They may be part of a program, but they're in no way sufficient. There's some new and emerging practices out there, like something called a software bill of materials, which is becoming increasingly prominent, where you can essentially peer into the code or peer into the governance of the code all the way down to be able to understand what vulnerabilities might be in it that are being passed along more or less silently to you, that someone else has made a risk decision on your behalf, and without telling you about it. And then they also don't take accountability once something has failed. So getting more transparency into supply chains is going to be a big deal. And I think all the way down to the package level, if not the code level. I think code level is probably not feasible, but package level certainly is. Secondly, I think we have to talk about accountability. If a supply chain supplier is passing something to you that has known vulnerabilities in it, that is going to end up getting you harmed, then you should have some recourse. And that comes to a very third rail topic, which is software liability. And the critics of software liability say if you do it wrong, then you'll decimate the software industry, you'll eliminate open source. And they're right. But that doesn't mean we should give up just because if we get it wrong, bad things will happen. It means we have to double down on getting it right, because bad things are already happening. I think, again, Mark, to the statement you made at the very beginning, if we're failing and we're doing the same things, then we got to change if we want to see something different. I think that these are the types of changes that we need to see in order to address the urgent and emerging threats of supply chain security.
Yeah.
So what besides supply chain? we're going to see a lot of small businesses have shut down. I lost my barber shop. Um, they just it just dried up.
I did too. Can't you tell?
No, I thought that was actually done.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's well done. Yeah.
the restaurants.
Hmm.
Lots of small community, small businesses. Uh, is, is, are they going to be vulnerable when they start spinning up? Some people say they're already being attacked. So what's the diff? I don't know.
Uh, and if I can add a few things here, I think everyone's using software. Doesn't matter if you're small size or medium sized businesses. Everyone's using some kind of SaaS solution, and these SaaS applications has implications. They're well designed. A lot of microservices, public cloud utilization to help them expand and make sure they're available. But API first is a good thing. But however, if you look at underneath API first, I mean the old days of building a web application was, I still remember MVC framework, model view control, right? Monolithic backend. You render your HTML in the server, then you present it to the user, right? If you think about that. But today's world is APIs are generating a lot of data. Then you do the single page app like a REST, REST API that basically bring the data in. If you're using React or something like that, but you're relying on the browser to filter out the information and render. So therefore, the experience is better. But think about the API behind it; those can be easily attacked. Because you could have too much data being sent over to the browser, and the browser makes it, filter out all the things you don't need. But for the bad guy, they can actually hit the back end and get the information. And also, I mean, just think along those things. The SaaS applications are basically very vulnerable in a sense where if we're not paying attention to how APIs are governed and managed and secured, let it be a restaurant, basically trying to run their payment system or however you look at it. You could get impersonated and probably cause a major problem for them. So generally, beyond just software supply chain, which we will talk about, I think there's a webinar dedicated for the conversation there. There are a lot of, design elements in how software built today needs to ramp up on security. I think OWASP just launched, maybe I say just, but it's like 2 years ago, API top 10, right? Just beyond just the normal top 10 security practices. So just as a software builder and anyone who is software builder, those are things I will recommend to pay attention to as a learning from the past to the future. Yeah.
Mark, can I add something regarding small businesses?
Yeah.
So I did another webinar for BCI that was focused on the SBA loan fraud. And this is kind of outside of security, but we did a lot of research that showed fraudsters were applying for loans on behalf of businesses. Now, this has two kind of future implications. A lot of these loans are going to become due in the middle of the year, I believe, June, July. Firstly, I wonder how much the government is going to be able to collect on these. And secondly, I wonder how many small businesses didn't even realize that a loan had been taken out on their behalf, which is going to lead to a lot of confusion, to say the least. Just being tied up with that sort of thing might be enough for a small business owner to say, I'm going to close up shop and shift, something like that. So just financial logistics outside of cybersecurity can be very disruptive.
Well, Tom, I was also thinking about other changes that we've made. For example, the way that we've in the United States, and I don't know whether it's happened elsewhere, but the move away from in-person voting to mail voting. My guess is that people who get used to voting by mail are not going to go back to a polling place.
That's been the trend for some time. Yeah.
Well, but this is kind of like a quantum step, a big change.
Absolutely.
And it's also going to change. So if I'm in I take my election pamphlet the government gives me, and I go to the voting place, and I vote for the things I think I've thought about and that I remember, and I skip everything else. But when I'm voting by mail, I sit down with my computer and I'm browsing, looking for information on whatever I'm not familiar with. Is this going to create a whole new set of vulnerabilities? Are people going to start taking advantage of this? And are there other ways, other things, once we make these big changes that we haven't thought about, that we need to think about?
Generally, I think wherever there's an avenue for disruption, the threat actors, fraudsters, what have you, are going to take advantage, right? So we saw at the very beginning of the pandemic with substandard and falsified medical equipment on through the pandemic. So yes, the pandemic is going to lead to quantum leaps, as you said, in a number of different ways. We always have to be mindful of kind of how that exposes us. And we've been moving so fast for so long. I think the pandemic is forcing us to stop and reevaluate some of this stuff.
There's some questions coming in about election systems. We did have a panel dedicated to cyber attacks on election systems last year, and we can have another one if that seems appropriate. I want to talk about scale for a minute, and it's kind of a segue back to Diana, who will talk about our next webinar. 2 days ago, there was an announcement from Microsoft that Microsoft estimated that there were 1,000 programmers involved in the SolarWinds attack. So if we go back to the early history, like Mitnick was one person operating without any kind of an ecosystem, without any kind of economy, without the ability to buy and sell vulnerabilities and all the other stuff that's going on now. I just think about how difficult it is for me and my company to organize, to recruit, hire, organize, direct, and make productive a team of 1,000 software developers. And then I wonder if that's the end. Are we going to see 10,000 programmer attack teams? What is this? What's going to happen with scale here?
I'm curious how they came to the number of 1,000, but I could see that if you include all of the developers who touched a part of the product, right, of what eventually came in, because you'll pull a lot of open source toolkits, you'll pull a lot of commercial toolkits. There'll be things that are involved. Somebody will have dropped a line of code on Stack Overflow that they'll have pulled in. So I'm skeptical of a number of 1,000 coders working within a single organization in order to go after a single company. Even if their target was the federal government, that still seems pretty high. I would guess that most of the work, just like any project, right, most of the work is done by a minority of the people involved. So I'm unconvinced, but I'm willing to be convinced if they can show some evidence of where they got the numbers from.
Well, leaving aside, I think those are good questions, and I agree that we need more detail there. But we do know in St. Petersburg there's a very large organization of attackers. We know that other governments around the world have government-sponsored attack teams that are quite large.
The U.S. has a big one, yeah.
I mean, I was surprised uh, many years ago when I found out that the drug cartels in Colombia were able to acquire all the resources and actually in an upstream river in an out of the way place with no power and no nothing, build a submarine that they could use to carry illicit drugs into the United States and other countries.
Necessity is the mother of all invention.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. If I'm looking at these types of attacks, I'm less concerned about the ones that require highly skilled, highly motivated, in a lot of cases, highly paid people. I'm more concerned about the ones where you can just guess an admin password and get access to some seriously important information or highly privileged access, or the one last week where a security researcher disclosed that they set up a domain or a package name squatting package and got access to code repos or was being pulled into code repos of, Fortune 10, Fortune 100 companies. Like, that's not super sophisticated. It doesn't take 1,000 people. It doesn't take all those resources. It could be done by anybody with not any level of skill, but a very low level of skill. It just takes a little bit of creativity, and the pathway is there.
Okay, so we're kind of in the middle of a discussion, but we've run out of time. Diana, would you like to close our seminar for today, our webinar for today? You're on mute, Diana.
Is that better?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I think that we had some interesting questions during the talk about open source versus vendor supply chains. And I think those types of questions are exactly what we'll be talking about in 2 weeks with the solar winds. I think all of these issues that you brought up today, and I really loved hearing all of your feedback, go to the change that we've undergone in the past year, where we have more remote work, we have more people that possibly are out of work, and the changes that caused in the hacker side as well. And so I really like not only the insight into it that you've given us today, but also the thoughts about, how do we move forward from this as we, as things continue to change, how do we continue to improve and make a difference? And so I want to thank you all. And again, our next webinar is in 2 weeks.